Well, hello. Well, it's a bit later than I thought it would be. I've only got about, I reckon, 15 minutes before I have to go to the opera. But I prepared a talk for you about, about a lot of things. About privilege, political correctness, and freedom of speech. Now, I thought I knew about a lot of these things already, because I'm an academic, but I discovered something new recently. Tell you what, let's have some music, shall we? It's quite nice. It's a nice radio station. It's a nice place, by the way, isn't it? As you can see, I'm quite wealthy. My family have been academics, politicians, and journalists for generations, and I just came up with a lot of money. I still need to get a bigger apartment, though, I reckon now. Being an academic is quite an easy life, actually, in all honesty. All you do is think for money. Once upon a time, thinking was difficult. But today it's really easy if you do something called the humanities. My speciality is something called ethnology. Ethnology is a way for white people to try to guess what the rest of the world is thinking. Ethnologists think long and hard about this because they get scared that the rest of the world will be offended by what they say. Now, to stop the rest of the world from getting offended, they came up with something called post-colonial theory. This says that you'll never ever guess what the rest of the world are thinking, so you have to say sorry all the time. Gosh, this is nice. And even when you decide what they're thinking, you're going to be wrong. Whatever it is, That's how it works with post-colonial theory. So anyway, people might think, though, that this job is useless because it makes nothing. And they might take away your money. So much of the job is spent explaining how important it is to guess what the rest of the world is thinking. Recently, they took this a step further. They realized that you don't actually have to guess what the rest of the world is thinking. Instead, you can just criticize the act of guessing what the rest of the world is thinking. This is much easier, as you no longer need the rest of the world, only the white people, and nobody gets offended. Well, this is my job. I just finished my doctorate on this. It was about how the West uses the word terrorist. It showed, I used a lot of complicated theory, but very simply, it showed that terrorists probably don't think they're terrorists, and they don't like it when you call them terrorists. They find the word offensive. Anyway, it logically follows that if you criticize all of this guessing, you have to criticize all that guessing in everything else you do in the world, not just in your work. You have to be consistent. This means you end up spending all of your time saying sorry for everything. Well, every year, all this saying sorry gets worse and worse. There's a sorry inflation. There's always new things to say sorry for. Fortunately, academics, politicians, and journalists invented a system to help decide how much sorry we should say and to whom. Those who have to say the most sorries have the most privilege. Those with the least privilege have to say the least sorries. Anyway, who has the most and least privilege is decided by academics, politicians, and journalists. They divide us all into groups and make a stack of who needs the most and the least sorries. Now, it's like these, I'll take these. This is how we decide who needs the most and the least sorries. And the thing is, every year, they change who needs the most. So for example, what genitals you have used to be very high, but these days, it's dropped down. However, what religion you have these days has gone much up. What colour you are has roughly stayed the same. For example, how much money you have has actually gone down. That's how it works. Anyway, there are people who make entire careers out of helping other people say sorry, And Western politicians seem to spend their whole time travelling around the world saying sorry to everyone. Saying sorry has become very important. Now, the newest thing we've invented is thinking of things to say sorry about before we've even offended anyone. This is called political correctness. Now, there are two ways to deal with all this saying sorry. One is to believe it and try as hard as you can to be sorry. The other is just to pretend to be sorry and carry on with your life. This is what I do. Nobody really cares how sorry you are. They just want to know if you're politically correct or not. Now, this system should be making the world very happy, but the problem is sometimes people want to offend other people because they think their thought is more important than saying sorry. We call this freedom of speech. We call people who do this intolerant. When this happens, it's the job of academics, politicians and journalists to solve the problem. Now, we have to silence intolerant people because the sorry economy is very fragile. If enough people don't want to say sorry, then the whole system could fall apart. So, we shame the intolerant person in public. However, some intolerant people think their thought is even more important than being ashamed. Fortunately, we can punish them legally now. This helps to protect the system and people's feelings. Now, in order to convince people to keep saying sorry, even when they aren't clever enough to know why, academics, politicians and journalists create narratives. A narrative is like a frikadelle. Now, you make a frikadelle when you only have a little bit of meat, but you're very, very hungry. Now, you mix the meat with bread, and you make it all seem like meat. A narrative is the same thing, but with truth. People love narratives because they give life purpose. Some people don't mind eating a frikadelle, even if there's no meat in it at all, because they believe it has meat in it. Even if you tell them there's no meat in it, you give them evidence, they won't believe you. They're too invested in the frikadelle. They need a purpose. As an academic, my job nowadays is mostly to look after these narratives. I have to add things to them to make them more believable and remove things that are implausible. It has to taste like there's meat in the frikadelle. Nobody told me to do this, but I'm always rewarded for it, so I do it anyway. Sometimes I wonder if my colleagues believe in these political narratives or not. I think they do. I can't eat any more of these things, actually. Absolutely dreadful. Now, I'm always very sorry to be politically correct. I always say all my sorries. I have a lot of privilege, so I have to say sorry a lot. Why did they make the frikadelle so big? Now, I say the right things, I write the right things, but I must confess that I don't really believe in the narratives, but I have to keep this a secret. You know, for example, I really like Donald Trump. He's a nice guy, you know. I don't understand why we have to agree with the narrative that he's a bad man. Academics, journalists and politicians keep saying it, but they don't really say why. And it seems to be they don't like what he says, but lots of poor people with less privilege than me do. So I'm confused. Anyway, the other thing I realise is that I can exploit everybody's secret intolerances. If I can use their privilege against them, even though they have more, I can make them look bad, and myself look better, because I'm better at knowing when to say sorry. So I did that for years. Here I am fresh, with a doctorate, about to make the next step in my career. I want to be a researcher. Teaching is hard work, but research is easy. So, at the unnamed German university where I work, a position has opened. 3 of my colleagues and myself, 1, 2, 3, we're going to be candidates for this job. It's a really, really good job, and I really want it. The only thing is that all of the other candidates have less privilege than me, so one of them should get the job. Indeed, one of them has different genitals from me. Another one has different coloured skin from me and different genitals. The third one just has different coloured skin from me. It's like that. Now, they're all more diverse than me. I'm supposed to say sorry to them a lot. How can I get the position? Well, I did a lot of thinking, and I realized that each of them must have an intolerance which I can exploit. Then, if they wouldn't say sorry, they'd have to not have the job. So here they are. Gin and tonic. Let's call this number 1. Now, number 1 has different genitals from me, but she's the same colour. She views the world in terms of which genitals people have. It's her narrative. She says that people with my genitals have always been bad to people with her genitals. They build entire structures to oppress people with her genitals. I don't think there's any meat in her fricadella. She explains that only people with her genitals can notice the structures. You can't see the structures, you have to feel them. I tell her I don't treat her any differently, but she says that's what people with my genitals always say. Still, I say lots of sorries to her because it's politically correct, and it's her purpose in life. Now, it took me a while to find a weakness. Finally, I realized from academics, politicians, and journalists that there's a new group of people who say it isn't about which genitals you have, but whether you feel like a man, a woman, or something else. Academics, politicians, and journalists have decided these people have less privilege than the group which number 1 belongs to. I had to wait for the right moment when the professor was there, and I asked her to say that she was sorry about the people who have different views on genitals from her. She only half said she was sorry. I asked her if they meant that her narrative didn't work anymore. She got very angry. She said she thought that even if you really feel like you're different from what you were born with, you still have the original genitals mentally. I told her she was being very offensive to those people and should say sorry. Academics, politicians, and journalists tell us these people are very brave and important. They need more sorries than almost everybody else. She would not say sorry. First, everybody with her genitals should get more sorries, and then the other group could. She said she was exercising her freedom of speech, and at that moment, I looked into the professor's eyes and smiled. She and I realized at that moment that she would not get the job. She was intolerant. Bye-bye. Anyway, number 2 has the same genitals as me, but his skin is a different color. However, his skin was not the most important thing. The most important thing was his religion, his beliefs. Beliefs are usually what the rest of the fricadella is made from. Sometimes people put lots and lots of beliefs together and connect them up until you get a really, really big narrative, like a monster fricadella. This is a religion. Religions are great because they give people's life a purpose and they give you a way to make decisions without needing evidence. Anyway, now, number 2 is a nice person, but he belongs to a religion which has a lot of angry people. It's a real shame that everyone in the religion is so angry, because academics, journalists, and politicians have explained to everyone that it's a religion of peace. If only the angry people of the religion of peace would listen to the academics, journalists, and politicians instead of to each other. Still, the academics, journalists, and politicians understand it's not very easy for these people because they're so angry and their religion is so peaceful, which is very frustrating. So they must have very little privilege. We have to say sorry to them a lot, as they get offended so easily. Even when they get so angry that people die, we still say sorry, because it's important. One of the things that number 2's religion doesn't like is when 2 people with the same genitals have sex. They say it's a sin, which is like being politically incorrect for a religion. Anyway, luckily soon afterwards I had dinner with him and number 1 and number 3, who I can't reach, but that's number 3, and a professor, and I talked to them all about how important it is that people with the same genitals can have sex, and even marry in some places. Marriage is like a religion, but only for 2 people. Anyway, it gives meaning. Now, a bit of purpose in life. Number 2 stayed quiet, but fortunately, number 1 was drunk. She thought that she could make the professor like her again by saying some extra sorries to people who like to have sex with people with the same genitals. She said she thought that everyone secretly wants to have sex with people with the same genitals sometimes. Then she wondered if terrorists are angry because they want it, but they can't have it. She joked that blowing yourself up is probably a bit like a big fiery orgasm. Number 2 quickly paid the bill and left. I was happy because I knew the professor didn't like number 2 because he had left, but also didn't like number 1 because she made him leave. Only number 3 and I were left to get the job. However, number 3 is a completely different mystery to me. Now, she has different genitals from me, and she also has different coloured skin, but her family were from the other side of the world and very rich. And so I couldn't decide if she had almost the same privilege as me, or much less. She was very, very clever, because she was never offended at anything. She could get sorries from everyone, but she never asked for them, which made her popular. I wondered, like me, if she also thought one thing in private, but said and wrote something else as an academic. Anyway, I left the restaurant. Number 3 stood very, very close to me and whispered. She said that she knew what I was doing and she found it sexy. I was surprised. She's very sexy, but because of what number 1 says about men, I had always been very politically correct to number 3. When I thought about it, I realised I actually really wanted to have sex with her, so I invited her back to my apartment. Anyway, there we drank gin and tonics and talked. She explained that she knew that she was just like me. She also knew we were always making bad frikadellen. She didn't believe in them. Like me, she knew it's really easy to use apologies and privilege to make people do what you want. Alright. You know, I asked her if she secretly liked Donald Trump, like I do. She agreed. She said she didn't believe what academics, politicians and journalists say about him, because some of them were starting to change their minds. They wanted new frikadellen. She said that he would get rid of political correctness. Now I thought for a moment, if he got rid of political correctness, then people might not want to say sorry all the time anymore. And then people might stop believing in privilege. She agreed and said that it was a good thing because she hated everyone say sorry to her all the time. It made her feel dirty, as if she wasn't the same as me. I asked her how people would deal with freedom of speech if nobody was there to stop them from being offensive. She explained that people would just learn to be offended less. People would want new narratives. They'd question how much meat was in the old ones, you know? Academics, politicians and journalists would have to work much harder and explain things to people more. I agreed with her, but then I realised something else. Now, if we don't need to say sorry anymore, we don't need ethnology anymore. We might not even need most of the humanities. We wouldn't be able to convince people to give us money anymore because they didn't feel sorry. I felt dizzy. What would the world do without ethnology? She said that maybe our lives needed a new purpose. Maybe we needed to make the world great again. Maybe it could be our job to tell people to worry less about their genitals or their religion and find other purposes like building things and having families and helping each other. At this, we both felt rather excited and we had lots of sex all night. I woke up in the morning next to her and she turned to me and smiled. She said to me, "Darling, I got the job last week. I'm sorry you did all that work for nothing." I felt quite angry. And she laughed suddenly. "There's one more thing," she said. "I was ovulating." "What?" I yelled. "We're having a baby?" "Yes," she said. "I was planning this for a while. You don't know how attracted I am to privileged white men. But don't worry, darling. As soon as my tummy is a little full of our baby, I'll leave the job on pregnancy leave, and you'll be hired to stand in for me while I have my baby. I will organize this with the professor. When the baby is born, I'll take a year or two of maternity leave, and you'll get hired again. The whole time, I'll be paid. Don't you see? This way, we both get the job. It was a good idea, and so we decided to marry. Now, sadly, I have to run. She and I are going to the opera. It's the Götterdämmerung, and you know, I can't wait to see how everything falls apart. Bye-bye.
Alexander Johannes Edmonds. Vielen Dank. We're going to talk to Alexander.